It might feel impossible right now, but part of the reason it feels impossible is because that's what the status quo needs to stay the same. If we feel hopeless and we're not acting, then nothing will change. And I think remembering about all the things that have changed, the freedoms we have, the places where we have made progress, is incredibly important to be able to keep going.
That's the voice of Sara Haghdoosti, the Executive Director on Women Without War. She's one of today's guests on Press the Button, a Plowshares Fund podcast dedicated to nuclear policy and national security. And now here are your co-hosts, Tom Collina and Lauren Billett.
Thanks, Angela, and welcome back to Press the Button. So it's not a great day to be a person with a uterus in this country. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the outraging events of this weekend. The Supreme Court ruled to overturn Roe v. Wade, which gave federal protections to the constitutional right to abortion. As a global peace and security foundation, Plowshares Fund believes that everyone has a right to a safe and secure future. This includes women's right to abortion, to choose what happens to their bodies, and to control their own lives, a right that everybody should have. This undoing of fundamental women's rights is an affront to all of us, and it's concerning both for future generations and for our country.
Thanks, Lauren, and I could not agree more. The Supreme Court has just overturned almost 5 decades of fundamental women's rights, and it comes on the heels of the Supreme Court's decision to strike down a critical New York gun safety law. And we should, of course, then all be concerned about future generations and, frankly, for the future of our country. So we stand with our partners who fight for women's rights and gun safety on a daily basis, thanks to all of those organizations for their essential work.
Yes, thank you everyone for your very important work. So Tom, a lot has happened over the weekend on the nuclear front. What do you have for us there?
This weekend, Russia said that it will transfer nuclear-capable Iskander missile launchers to its ally Belarus over the coming months. At a meeting in St. Petersburg, President Putin told Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko that the weapon was capable of launching ballistic and cruise missiles, both in conventional and nuclear versions. Russia reportedly fired conventional missiles from Belarus over the weekend, and this marks the first time in the Ukraine war that Russia has conducted airstrikes from Belarus. And this week we'll find President Biden in Europe for the G7 summit taking place in Germany. The G7 states are expected to announce new coordinated actions to increase economic and military pressure on Russia. On the Iran front, I don't often say this, but there appears to be a glimmer of hope in efforts. It appears the talks to save the 2015 Iran nuclear deal have been revived as Qatar is expected to host indirect talks between Iran and the United States in the coming days. According to media reports, U.S. Special Envoy Rob Malley was expected to arrive in Doha on Monday, and Iran's chief negotiator is expected to be in Doha on Tuesday and Wednesday. This comes after European Union Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell traveled to Iran over the weekend to get the talks unstuck. So none of this is conclusive. A lot of the difficult negotiating issues remain, but we will keep our fingers crossed. Lauren, what do you have for us this week on early warning?
This week, Alex Hall sat down with Alicia Sanders-Zakre, the Policy and Research Coordinator at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, known as ICANN. They discussed ICANN's forum of events that took place last week in Vienna, as well as the first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
And then we air a discussion that we had from the Action Now panel, which I moderated at this month's Plowshares Fund Chain Reaction Gala. I talked with Jamal Abdi at the National Iranian American Council, Istra Furhmann from the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and Sara Haghdoosti at Win Without War. We discussed the war in Ukraine, the Iran nuclear deal, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, and much more. It's a great conversation, so please stay tuned. And if you want to see the video too, you can watch it at our website, plowshares.org.
And if you like what you hear, remember to hit subscribe and leave us a rating. Your feedback helps us to improve the show. And with that, let's get into today's episode. The clock is ticking.
And now, early warning, early warning, early warning, early warning. a 7-minute synopsis of this week's nuclear news.
Thank you, Jacqueline. There was a jammed-packed week in Vienna surrounding the first meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons last week. This treaty entered into force in 2021 and includes a comprehensive set of prohibitions on participating in any nuclear weapons activities, including the development, testing, stockpiling, or use of nuclear weapons. The International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICANN, was instrumental in the development and encouragement of ratification of the treaty by member states. Prior to the meeting of states parties, ICANN led a 2-day forum for civil society partners, and the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs held the 4th conference on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. Here, to share more about this incredible and historical week of events, is Alicia Sanders-Zakre, Policy and Research Coordinator at ICANN. Welcome, Alicia.
Thanks for having me.
So I hope you can walk us through the highlights of the week, starting with ICANN's Ban Forum. What were your key takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, it was such an amazing full week. Hard to capture it all. But yeah, starting with our big civil society forum the weekend before the Humanitarian Conference and the meeting of states parties. It was, I think a really exciting moment for people to come together for the first time in a long time, really to energize kind of the movement for nuclear abolition, bringing together people, newcomers to the movement, a lot of youth, together with veterans who have been working for nuclear abolition for decades, and really hearing from a diverse group of speakers in terms of gender, in terms of age, race, region, hearing from this broad set of experts about nuclear weapons, featuring, of course, survivors of nuclear use and testing at the very center of the meeting. So I think it was, a really energizing time for so many people to come together and prepare for this really historic week of meetings to follow and build the blueprint for disarmament.
Amazing. So you touched on the humanitarian elements. Can you share some of the significant moments that happened during the Humanitarian Conference?
For those who are less new to the fields, will know that there has been a series of conferences on the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons that led up to the negotiation and adoption of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So this is really at the core of this treaty and the basis for why it was negotiated and kind of why we're all in this movement. So, we thought it was very important, very glad that Austria decided to convene a 4th Humanitarian Impacts Conference to review kind of previous findings about humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons, and also introduce some of the new research that's come up in the past years. For me, I think it was really powerful to hear at the outset from Suzuka Nakamura, who's a 22-year-old 3rd-generation hibakusha, really calling out Japan for not showing up to the meeting. And also to hear from Danity Laken in the beginning of the meeting from the Marshall Islands, again, really calling for assistance for survivors of nuclear weapons use and testing, and recognizing that this is a contribution of this meeting and of this treaty. And I think the rest of the panels as well were just incredibly informative, useful, really presenting kind of what all countries, all diplomats should know about the real facts of what these nuclear weapons are and what they do and why we need to eliminate them.
What came out of the meeting of states parties itself?
Where to begin? I mean, I guess, just starting with the meeting itself, I think one of the real highlights of the entire week, including the meeting of states parties, was just what an incredibly diverse and inclusive meeting it was. It started out featuring the Prime Minister of Fiji, the ICRC, a testing survivor from Kazakhstan, all in kind of the high-level segments, and really substantive interventions on every aspect of the treaty from both states and civil society. I personally was really impacted and moved by the powerful interventions from Hinamora Cross and Lena Normand on the impacts of nuclear testing in French Polynesia, and recommendations for actions on victim assistance and environmental remediation. So it was, I think really an incredible series of statements and interventions throughout the entire meeting. But, the highlights, I think, was actually the conclusion of the meeting, the adoption of the Vienna Declaration and the Vienna Action Plan. These are the outcome documents of the meeting adopted unanimously by all states parties. And so I'll just kind of walk through why I think these are really groundbreaking outcomes for the TPNW. So at first, starting with the Vienna Declaration, this is the strongest condemnation of threats to use nuclear weapons in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine that we've seen come from any multilateral conference. And I feel pretty confident saying that, particularly after we saw the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually issue a statement themselves after the adoption of this declaration, where they tried to reject that, particularly that they've threatened to use nuclear weapons and to try to deny what is stated so clearly in the declaration. So I think, this is clearly a very strong condemnation of threat to use nuclear weapons, very important to have in this current context, amongst other restatements of commitments to the treaty and to implementing the treaty throughout the declaration. But then I think it's also really important to note the action plan. It's really remarkable. This is the first action plan to advance nuclear disarmament, to have specific steps to take forward implementation of a treaty on nuclear weapons since 2010, when the NPT adopted its own 64-step plan, which largely, I think, still remains to be implemented. So the 50 steps in the Vienna Action Plan are really game changers, not only for nuclear weapons, with kind of the specific steps in there for taking forward the universalization of the TPNW, of implementing victim assistance, but also actually for disarmament law as a whole. There's some really innovative standalone actions there on inclusion of civil society and affected communities and indigenous peoples, as well as actually putting, states' words and commitments on gender and disarmament into concrete actions. So, for example, there is an obligation to facilitate active participation of affected communities and indigenous peoples in treaty meetings, really taking into account specific needs of these groups, and even, considering voluntary contributions to help them attend. And there's also an obligation there to appoint a gender focal point. So this is a representative that can coordinate and report on implementation of gender commitments and to work on specific guidelines for states. So it's, I think, really a lot of exciting, groundbreaking commitments there that we've seen states take forward in Vienna.
That's incredible, Alicia. So we know this was a jammed-packed week. Where can people go to learn more and potentially even watch some of these events?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of different resources. If you want to just read the texts straight as they are, I know there might be many in the DC kind of wonky policy community who want to do that. You can go right to the UN website for the TPNW MSP, and you'll see all the outcome documents, statements listed there. If you want kind of more analytical, detailed reporting, I'd recommend checking out Reaching Critical Will's Nuclear Ban Daily, where they were reporting from the negotiations. On ICANN side, we have an analysis of the outcome documents, particularly of the action plan, in a briefing paper on our website under resources. And if you want to catch up on all of the amazing panels that were part of the Nuclear Ban Forum over the weekend, you can go to our specific website for the Nuclear Ban Forum, which is vienna.icanw.org/live. And you can watch all the sessions that were recorded there.
Thank you so much, Alicia.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Shing, the Communications and Marketing Specialist at Plowshares Fund. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has exposed just how close nuclear escalation and nuclear war can be. To meet the urgency of this moment, Plowshares Fund has launched a donation match challenge to make the largest grants possible to those who are working every day to reduce and eliminate nuclear weapons. Right now, all first-time gifts will be matched dollar for dollar, and all new monthly gifts will be matched at their 12-month value. Or increase your giving and the full amount above your last gift will be matched. Go to plowshares.org/donate today. And thanks for listening.
For this week's main interview, we will be sharing the recording of the panel Action Now, which aired on June 8th as part of Plowshares Fund annual Chain Reaction Gala. We hope you enjoy this conversation.
We're going to be covering some of the most important nuclear challenges that we're facing as a country and as a world today, and how we can best address them. We're going to discuss the Ukraine war and its nuclear risks, the Iran nuclear deal and how that process is going or not going, and a key legacy issue, radiation exposure and nuclear justice. And we have a great panel of experts for you tonight to help us along in this process. I'll just go through all three of them right now. Sara Haghdoosti is Executive Director of Women Without War and has over 10 years of experience in digital campaigning. She founded Bareem.org, an organization that worked to support changemakers in Iran and worked previously at the Mozilla Foundation, Change.org, and Get Up Australia. Sara is author of the novel Sunburnt Veils, something that I hope to add to my summer reading list because it sounds absolutely great. Next, we have Jamal Abdi. He is president of the National Iranian American Council, known as NIAC, and the executive director of NIAC Action, the group's civic action organization. Jamal previously worked in the U.S. Congress as a policy advisor for foreign policy and immigration, and as a field organizer in his home state of Washington. Third, we have Istra Furhmann. She's the program assistant for nuclear disarmament and Pentagon spending at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL. And she leads their work on Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, known as RECA, which we'll talk more about in just a minute. So we're going to have a short conversation with each of you in turn, starting first up on Ukraine with Sara. Sara, great to see you.
Lovely to be here, and thank you so much for organizing this fantastic event.
So Ukraine, a simple subject for us to discuss. In a recent New York Times op-ed, President Biden outlined his policy on Ukraine. The president said he wants to help Ukraine defend itself without provoking a U.S. war with Russia. Sounds simple. What do you think about this approach, and what should we be concerned about?
The Biden administration deserves a lot of praise for the way they've approached this conflict. It was really crucial that the Russian government's war of aggression be met with condemnation. And I think the president has done a really great job of holding the Russian government to account, condemning that violence, and also centering the people in Ukraine while trying to avoid direct confrontation. That said, there is an aspect of this that I do worry about. I understand the argument that military support is key in us supporting the Ukrainian government's negotiating posture in order to be able to end this war diplomatically, which is the only way it can end. But that said, I do think that it's really key that we keep a close eye and monitor both the perception and the impact that military aid is having, so that we don't accidentally stumble across a red line that either leads to direct confrontation or, in the worst case scenario, leads to further escalation and nuclear threats by Russia.
Well, great points there. And Biden specifically mentioned that many people are concerned about the possible use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And he said that any of the use of the bomb by Russia would be met by severe consequences, quote unquote. How can we best avoid the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine? And how can we end this war in a way that does not increase the chances of their use?
Ultimately, the only way to avoid using nuclear weapons is to not have them. That said, in the short term, I do think there are a few things that we can push for and look for. One is diplomacy is the only way to end the war in Ukraine. And the key to ensuring that that is a lasting peace is to center Ukrainian voices within that process. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing here is to remember that diplomacy doesn't just happen, it needs investment. And to put this in context, just one weapons manufacturer, Lockheed Martin, received $75 billion worth of Pentagon contracts in 2020, which is more than the entire funding of the State Department. So if we want to reduce the likelihood of the use of nuclear weapons, one of the most urgent things we can do is push for more investment in diplomacy.
And last question for you, what impact do you see from the war in Ukraine on our understanding of the role of nuclear weapons?
I think, sadly, this conflict has shown that the threat of nuclear war is not abstract and how possible it is. I think it's also really reinforced that nuclear weapons do not prevent the unfolding horror of war that people in Ukraine are currently experiencing. And I also think that this particular conflict has highlighted the need to challenge the mindset that leads to these kinds of conflicts. And I want to spend a minute there. The story that Putin told to justify this horrific invasion is one that many communities who have experiences with imperial aggression are deeply familiar with. And I think in one of the best speeches of the year, the ambassador to Kenya to the UN rightfully condemned the idea that the path to greatness is through nostalgia and through looking back. And I think it's really important to say that what's happening in Ukraine in a lot of ways isn't unique. And opening up the space to see that, to say we've seen this type of imperial aggression before. We've seen it throughout Africa. We've seen it throughout the Middle East, Latin America, and Southeast Asia is really important for contextualizing both the brutality of what is happening, but to really underline just how unacceptable that is. And I think by creating space for that narrative, we bring in new and diverse voices and a coalition that can create the kind of cultural condemnation that strengthens the Ukrainian negotiating position, but more importantly, makes it harder for this kind of thing to ever happen again.
Sara, thank you very much. We're going to shift issues briefly and come back to you in a minute, so please don't go away. Next up, we're going to talk about the Iran deal with Jamal. According to international inspectors, Iran has enriched enough uranium for the production of a nuclear weapon for the first time. And this, of course, does not mean that Iran can or will build a bomb. And so question for you, Jamal, what other steps would Iran have to take to become a nuclear state? And do you think that they will take those steps?
It's a good question. Iran has been on the brink of a nuclear weapon for 20 years now, if you listen to what folks have been saying. I think it's clear if Iran wanted a nuclear weapon, they probably would have had one by now. So it's really important to keep in mind, Iran has not made the political decision to actually build the nuclear weapon. That being said, these prophecies of the last 20, 25, 30 years that Iran's on the brink of a nuclear weapon, they are now on the brink of actually achieving nuclear threshold status. However, actually putting that, onto a deliverable weapon, putting it into a warhead, that's going to take, at least a year, probably longer than that. So the threat is not that Iran is immediately going to be a nuclear weapons power, but that Iran is going to be a nuclear threshold power, and it's much more difficult to detect and deal with an Iran that has the fissile material for 1 to nuclear weapons. So the crux of this is, what is the decision, the political decision that Iran is making? There are the technical challenges and the hurdles, and Iran has largely overcome, at least on the enrichment side, has overcome those hurdles. So it's not as much a technical question, but a political decision. I think, unfortunately, the lesson of the past 5 years, since Donald Trump came into office and pledged to tear up the nuclear deal and then did so, inside Iran, attitudes are hardening. And you do have voices who long argued against weaponization, who have come out and said it is a rational decision for Iran to build a nuclear weapon and it should be pursued. Because when Iran entered a diplomatic agreement to limit its program, it still was the subject of sanctions and efforts at regime change, and Iran was punished. So they're sort of damned if they do, damned if they don't. And so there is an argument that it would make sense to have a nuclear deterrent, which is really troubling and is something, we didn't need to be in this position. I still don't think that, Iran is on the verge of making that decision necessarily. I think it's important to keep in mind that the reason we are at this point, where Iran is enriching uranium to 60%, which is much closer to weapons grade, something they had never done before, this was in response to sabotage of its nuclear facilities. The decision to abandon the nuclear restrictions that it was under the Iran nuclear deal was in response to Trump leaving the deal and then actually designating a branch of Iran's military as a terrorist organization. But I still think that the Iranians view it as a strategy of potential nuclear hedging, having the option, using that as leverage either to obtain concessions, find some sort of diplomatic victory, what could be a deterrent, a security deterrent, to give it sort of that maneuverability. And as I said, the debate has hardened. It is going in the wrong direction. And unless we get back to a nuclear deal, I fear where this is actually going to lead, especially if there are efforts by the US or Israel to try to deal with Iran's nuclear program through kinetic action and through sabotage.
And what, in your view, is the most important thing that has to happen now to get back into the deal?
Well, I really think the Biden administration came into office and kind of hemmed and hawed about this. And I really think that it seems clear that they have not made the political decision to do what it takes to enter the deal. There is a deal on the table. Apparently, there is a final roadblock left. And it's not the roadblock of, the U.S., we don't know if we can actually guarantee that we will stay in a deal or, the next president's going to come in and tear it up again. We can't even guarantee to Iran and the rest of the world that sanctions relief will last beyond 2024 if we enter it. Somehow we have overcome that issue. And the remaining issue is dealing with some of the sanctions that Donald Trump put in place. And these are sanctions that, folks in the White House and advocates supporting those sanctions explicitly talked about these as sanctions designed to block a Democratic president from re-entering the Iran nuclear deal. This was all devised kind of around the time that Democrats were starting to say that they would commit to re-entering once they took the White House. These measures are symbolic. They don't really add any value to the U.S.'s ability to hold, terrorist organizations accountable or to counter actions like that. And yet the Biden administration has judged that it's not worth actually lifting those measures and is instead saying these are not related to the nuclear issue, and so they need to be dealt with in another fora. I think this is so important that we need the Biden administration to do what it takes, understand how important this moment is, and bite the bullet and make this happen, and understand that, maybe the conventional wisdom is this is going to be challenging politically, but in the long term, a nuclear armed Iran or a, disastrous war with Iran is going to be much worse politically, not to mention in practical terms, than simply doing what it takes to get back into this deal that the United States abrogated.
Jamal, thank you for that. We're going to switch issues, but don't go away. We're going to be right back to you in a minute. Last up, we're going to talk nuclear justice with Istra. Istra, great to see you. The Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, again known as RECA, has been around since 1990, and in recent years has been an area in which we've seen the most bipartisan support for nuclear issues. Tell us why RECA is so important.
So RECA, as you mentioned, stands for the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. And this is a historic program that compensates Americans who developed cancers when they were unknowingly exposed to radiation through U.S. nuclear weapons activities. And RECA includes a couple of different categories. Downwinders, who, as most people probably know already, are local civilians blanketed with fallout from nuclear tests, uranium miners, and atomic veterans, who are also sometimes called on-site participants. And as you mentioned, Tom, RECA does have a long bipartisan history. It was originally spearheaded in Congress by the late Republican Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah and signed into law by President George H.W. Bush. And not everybody knows that the United States tested over 200 nuclear weapons above ground on its own soil. And for many of the people who were impacted by these tests or who became sick through mining material used to create the nuclear arsenal, RECA compensation has been a lifeline. For people like uranium miners in the Navajo Nation, where cancer rates doubled after uranium mining began.
Thanks for that. Now, President Biden signed a 2-year RECA extension into law. Now, this is a step in the right direction, but tell us what more needs to be done to expand this program.
Absolutely. So we were very excited to see this short-term extension become law, especially because this life-saving compensation fund was actually set to expire next month. Also, it's just so rare that anything gets passed in the nuclear weapons realm, and in this case with support from both parties, so a really encouraging sign. This particular legislation was known as a clean extension. It didn't make any reforms to the program. So I see this as buying us more time to fully expand RECA, which is the focus of our work. RECA has a very limited scope right now. It covers some downwinders in Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, but has never included equally impacted people in New Mexico, which is the site of the world's very first nuclear bomb detonation, or in places like Guam, Idaho, Montana, or Colorado, which we know were all highly irradiated from US nuclear testing. RECA also does not include certain categories of uranium workers, such as those in the industry after 1971, even though cancer rates did not change after 1971. And nor does RICA cover atomic cleanup veterans, who are US service members who were deployed to clean up radioactive material in the Marshall Islands without protective gear. So all of this is to say, we clearly still have work to do, but we're really hopeful that this recent bipartisan momentum for radiation compensation can now be translated into further action to expand the program.
Thanks very much. Now, why don't we bring all three of our panelists up? Please tell us one thing that you hope to achieve as part of your work in the next year and what it will take to make it happen. And Jamal, let's start with you.
Well, this is not going to be a surprise, but restoring the nuclear deal, restoring the JCPOA, or if not, some nuclear agreement to ensure that we are not in a nuclear crisis where Iran either has a weapon or is a threshold power. So hopefully the next chain reaction will be talking about how we build on a deal to advance non-proliferation throughout the region.
And next, Istra, something you would expect to hope to achieve next year.
By next year, we would really like to see a major expansion bill that we've been working on get passed. It's known as the RICA Amendments of 2021, and has come together thanks to the tireless work of impacted community members. It would make a lot of positive changes, like extending RICA for 19 years, adding eligibility for downwinders in every state I mentioned, as well as Guam. And I think it will take a lot of education to get to this coalition and build this coalition to pass the bill that we need to see. So we're creating an upcoming website, expandrica.org, which I've been working on with a small group of advocates and in consultation with frontline community groups across the states and Guam. And this website will go live this month at expandrica.org, and will hopefully be a central resource for personal stories and take action pages.
Excellent. Thank you. And Sara?
One thing we'll be doing is supporting investment in diplomacy and trying to push back on increasing military systems. So working on the Iran deal, as well as making arguments and closely tracking the development of the Sea-Launched Cruise Missile and the B-83 programs. And again, making sure that our priorities are in line with our values, so that we're investing in diplomacy and ways that can resolve conflict and make us safer, instead of increasing militarized weapon systems that only erode that security.
Thank you very much. Next question, and Istra, will be starting with you. When you talk to your friends and family about these issues, what are you telling them about the state of peace and security around the world right now, and what gives you hope?
I would say, people are really scared right now, as we're talking about throughout this event, with Russia's nuclear threats. And I've seen a huge increase in interest, especially in people about my age who have never necessarily lived through the kind of nuclear threats we're seeing right now, in understanding experiences of people who've been exposed to radiation or who have witnessed nuclear detonations. So I think that when we're having these conversations, we need to make sure we're listening to survivor voices who are sounding the alarm about the devastating impacts of any use of nuclear weapons. And I know for me, the way I thought about nuclear weapons issues really changed after I met a woman in my own Texas community who had lost 13 family members to nuclear testing radiation. So I would encourage people to understand nuclear weapons are taking people's lives right now. And it's really encouraging to see this spotlight on the issue that we're seeing.
Thank you. Sara, shifting to you, what are you talking about and what gives you hope?
I have also encountered that a lot of people are scared and also feeling hopeless around some of these issues and being like, how do we actually create change? And one person that I often end up quoting to people is a writer, Ursula Le Guin, and reminding them that once the divine right of kings felt inescapable, but through the power of movements and people, that shifted. And the power of movements and people is the only thing that has created transformative change. It might feel impossible right now, but part of the reason it feels impossible is because that's what the status quo needs to stay the same. If we feel hopeless and we're not acting, then nothing will change. And I think remembering about all the things that have changed, the freedoms we have, the places where we have made progress, is incredibly important to be able to keep going.
Thank you. Excellent words. They always say that change seems impossible until it happens. Let's try to keep that in mind. Jamal, from you, things you're talking about and what gives you hope.
I'm probably having a lot of similar conversations just with folks who feel like our politics are broken and feeling like, okay, what am I going to do about it? I think we had high expectations for what was going to happen once Trump was not in office. So there's some disillusionment. I think it's important to keep in mind on all of these issues, the people are with us. I mean, consistently, when people are asked about, whether it's nuclear weapons or the Iran deal, they're on our side. And so I think for us, the challenge is, like many of our political debates right now, how do we take the fact that we have a majority, we've got an overwhelming population that supports these things, and work through our political system to actually get this done, instead of allowing a very small minority to be able to manipulate these issues and kind of drive the day. And that's the challenge. I don't have an answer for it, but I think what Sara said is actually right. It's about showing up. It's about being there and having that energy and intensity, because we have achieved a lot. We need to keep that in mind.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's go to the last question because time is short, and we'll try to keep this as sort of a lightning round. In just a few words, tell us what is one action our audience members can take right now to change nuclear weapons policies, the one that you're most worried about, for the better. And this time we'll start with John.
Everybody needs to have a relationship with their representative. They represent you. They are the ones who are supposed to be carrying the message from their constituents upward. And so building that relationship through an organization, through an organized way is what I hope everybody will do. And I think all the organizations here are facilitating that kind of work.
Great. Thank you. Istra, one thing our audience members can do.
I would say make nuclear frontline communities part of your activism and urge your legislator to expand the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act now.
Excellent. And Sara?
I'm going to plus one to the two speakers before me, and also say we desperately need a more diverse, rigorous debate in this space. So uplift voices of impacted communities. Every retweet, every time you highlight those perspectives, it adds to that power and it shifts this debate in ways we need it to be shifted.
Wonderful. Well, I really want to thank you, Sara, Jamal, and Istra for helping our audience understand these issues.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced and edited in Washington, D.C. by Lauren Billett, Angela Kellett, and Alex Hall. Audio engineering in San Francisco by Jacqueline Shing. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based band 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit plowshares.org.